apostasy and schism are three different things. I honestly can't remember if we've covered them before, which is a bad sign, because if the teacher doesn't remember, then how can you expect anybody else to remember? But apostasy is when I renounce the faith and I say, like, I'm not a Christian anymore. You can think of in Roman times when they're like, say you're not a Christian, or we will, or we will put you to death, or offer a sacrifice to our pagan gods, or we will put you to death. So apostasy is abandonment of the faith. Heresy is when I when I'm leading others into error about the faith, about, when if I tell people the Catholic Church teaches this, but actually I'm wrong, that's not what the Catholic Church teaches. And even after people try to correct me, I still stay by that, and I still present it as the correct faith, and I'm leading others astray in that, and I'm obstinate in that. So that's heresy. And then schism is when I break off from the rest of the Catholic Church, usually saying that I'm the real Catholic Church and they're all wrong about being Catholic somehow. It's related to heresy, but it's more like organizationally, where where my group kind of breaks itself off and sets itself apart from the rest of the Catholic Church, usually saying that we're somehow better or whatever, we're like the true believers, and that they've all gone astray somehow. So that's heresy, apostasy, schism. Don't do that. And then another one is if you commit sacrilege against Holy Communion hosts, like if you break into the tabernacle and you do bad things to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, that'll get you excommunicated. So don't do that. There was a question over here. Yes.
How does view on schism relate to modern ecumenism?
Right. So the question's about schism. To get into schism or into heresy, you have to be Catholic. So we don't consider people who have never been Catholic to be heretics, because we don't expect them to be Catholic. And so if there's promoting something that's not Catholic, they're also not distorting Catholicism by saying that what they're promoting is Catholicism. So you kind of think of it that way. That helps. Okay, so heresy, apostasy, schism, sacrilege against Holy Communion. As we mentioned last time, abortion. The next one is perhaps the most comical, if you can consider any of these crimes to be comical: physical assault against the person of the Roman pontiff. So that's you go to the Pope in Rome or wherever he is, and you take a swing at him. That will get you excommunicated. So so you got to find the Pope to do that. So that's kind of, and then the next one, the rest of them can only be done by priests. So you're off the hook on this if you're not a priest, but if a priest hears someone's confession and then says what happened in the confession, so we call that the violation of the seal of the confessional, that's an excommunication automatically. So which I might have covered when we talked about the sacrament of confession. The next one is, this is one of those where you never would have even thought of this as a possibility, but if a priest, for example, has an affair with a woman, and then that woman goes to confession to him, and he tries to absolve her of the sin of having an affair with him. First of all, that doesn't work. You cannot absolve your own accomplice in this crime. And second of all, trying to do so gets you excommunicated as the priest. So the absolution doesn't happen, and so the person still needs to be, the woman still needs to confess her sins to another priest, and the priest who tried to absolve is excommunicated. But hey, maybe you should just follow your promise of celibacy, and you wouldn't be in this problem in the first place. So that's that one. And then the next one, you have to be a bishop to do this one. So if you're the way to, as you know, when we talked about the sacraments, the sacrament of holy orders in its three grades: deacon, priest, bishop, and the way that a man is ordained is by a bishop. Only a bishop can be the minister of the sacrament of holy orders. But to make a new bishop, to make a priest into a bishop, because every bishop is first a priest and every priest is first a deacon, to make a bishop, only the Pope gets to decide who is going to be a new bishop. And only the Pope gets to decide which bishop goes and serves where. This bishop is going to be the bishop of this diocese. This bishop is going to be the bishop of this diocese. this priest is going to get made a bishop and then assigned to this diocese, etc. And so but then once the Pope says like, okay, this priest is going to become a bishop, then usually the bishops, one bishop in that area and then several other bishops with him will ordain that priest a bishop. We call that episcopal consecration. He's consecrated a bishop. Now, so that's how it's supposed to work. Now, if a bishop decides to just grab a priest and consecrate him a bishop without the Pope saying, like, ordain this man a bishop, then that act of conferring that sacrament causes both the ordainer and the one being ordained, the minister and the recipient of that sacrament, to be automatically excommunicated. So that was slightly complicated to explain, but can only be committed by a bishop. So that's a bishop trying to consecrate a new bishop without the mandate from the Holy Father. Finally, there's this like weird other scenario, whereas if somebody else commits a crime which has the automatic penalty of excommunication, and I'm an accomplice to that crime, and there's various levels of being an accomplice. So the level is, and I'm an accomplice without whose assistance the crime couldn't be committed. So if I'm a pretty essential accomplice to this crime, then I get the same penalty as the main person who committed the crime. So if it's a crime that gets automatic excommunication, then I as the accomplice also get that. So there you go. Ways that you can get automatically excommunicated: heresy, apostasy, schism, sacrilege against Holy Communion, abortion, physical assault against the person of the Roman Pontiff, violation of the seal of confession, absolution of an accomplice in a sin against the Sixth Commandment, episcopal consecration without papal mandate, or accomplice without whose assistance that one of those crimes could not have been committed. Woo, fun stuff. But hopefully you don't have to worry about that, because hopefully you're not committing those crimes. Okay, another matter that came up from last time we talked about the Fifth Commandment and which is thou shalt not kill. And we talked a lot about abortion, and I tried to explain some of the, obviously many dimensions to that. I tried to explain some of those. And one question that came up after class was, what about the idea of viability? So so as you know, when we're talking about a fetus in utero, there's this sort of point of viability. So before viability, if this child is born, they're probably not going to survive. After viability, if this child is born, they're premature, but they'll probably survive. And so this is, some people look at things before viability and after viability, and that's an important line for certain things. And just to be clear, for abortion, abortion is wrong both before and after. So it's not like abortion is only wrong for one and not the other. Abortion is wrong at any point because we're talking about a unique human individual, a distinct human person, distinct from the mother or the father, from conception, from when there's unique DNA. And so following the general principle that if it's always wrong to deliberately terminate an innocent human life, then whether or not that life is viable outside the womb, it remains wrong. So just as a clarification on that point. And if you're just hearing this part and you haven't seen the last part, go back and see the last part. Woo. Okay, any questions about anything before we dive into today's topic? All right. If you thought last time was easy, wait till we get to this one. Today we're going to cover two commandments, the Sixth Commandment and the Ninth Commandment. The Sixth Commandment is, thou shalt not commit adultery. The Ninth Commandment is, they shall not covet thy neighbor's wife. So they're kind of related. So, and then there's actually not a whole lot to say about the Ninth Commandment. So like by the time you're done with the Sixth Commandment, you pretty much said everything there is to say about the Ninth Commandment as well. So like most of the commandments, the actual text is a prohibition, but the church has kind of looked at the Sixth Commandment as sort of really talking about all of human sexuality, just like when we talked about the Fifth Commandment, we were talking about all kinds of violence and like assaults against the dignity of the human person. So what we want to do before because like the way people think of it is like that there's this like really long list of all of these prohibitions that, you know, just like the church just says like, no, you're not allowed to do like any of these things. And that's one way of formulating things. Another way of formulating things is to elaborate a positive vision of what the church says about us, about human sexuality, and then to see what the consequences of that are, which is going to be don't do certain things. But so to start with the kind of the positive vision, first of all, it's worth, so, okay. We'll start with the virtue, because virtues are good. And so virtues are stable habits of excellence that help us to do the right thing, to do the good thing. They often fall between an excess and a defect. So you don't want to do something too much. You don't want to do something too little. You want to do it like just right. And virtues are opposed to vices. Vices are bad habits, so stable dispositions where we are doing bad stuff. So the usual example of the virtue is courage, which helps us to have strength in the face of danger, not too much strength in the face of danger, because that would be foolhardiness, and we would just run into danger all the time and just get ourselves killed, and other people hurt probably. But not too little courage in the face of danger, because that would be cowardice, and then we would never get out of bed or never leave the house or whatever. So courage is like just the right amount, which depends on a lot of things. It's not going to be the same for everybody. And so another big virtue is the virtue of temperance. Courage is the one that pushes me forward to like get out there and go get them and like go face that difficult thing. Whereas temperance is the one that pulls me back when I'm like running headlong into something that I'm attracted to, but maybe I'm gonna go overboard on. So if courage pushes me forward and encourages me to do something that I'm like not really excited to do on my own, temperance is one that kind of pulls me back from things that I am excited to do on my own. So we think of the easiest examples are like food and drink, that temperance helps me to eat the right amount, not too much and not too little. Perhaps most of us tend toward wanting to eat too much or things that are unhealthy or junk food or whatever, and temperance helps pull us back. Sometimes our problem is actually the other way. We are left to ourselves. We would eat too little, and temperance would help us to eat the right amount. Just like courage, most people need to be pushed to have more courage, but some people need to be pulled back from having too much and being foolhardy. So temperance gets me that right amount and in the right way. You could say, like if we relate it to food, not only the right amount of food, but the right time, how many times a day you're eating or whatever, and what I'm eating and being healthy and all that good stuff. And then we can think of also, consumption of alcohol having the right moderate amount. And so, and that is there a too little amount of alcohol? Probably not, for some people, the correct amount of alcohol is 0 because they cannot handle any more than that. And that any more than that would turn into a problem for them. So I don't want to make it sound like that if I'm being temperate, that I am having more than 0. The temperate amount for me might be 0 for a given thing. So there's a virtue called chastity. And chastity is a sub-virtue of temperance. It's like a version of, it's like a one way in which temperance is played out. And so chastity we think of as being, so just like we have like our instincts to eat and to just like, when food is in front of us, to just stuff it in our face, we also have instincts towards procreation, shall we say. And so these are instincts which we don't want to be ruled by our instincts. We want to rule our instincts. I want to have self-mastery. I want to be sort of self-possessed rather than just chasing out, letting my stomach be my boss. So that's kind of what we're looking at with chastity as well. So chastity is going to be like the proper integration of my sexuality in my life. That I'm not going to let my sexuality kind of be my boss and just like push me around, I'm going to be in control, but also obviously not like suppressing or repressing or anything unhealthy either. So, so the idea is having this virtue which helps us to properly integrate our sexuality, and so that we're living our whole lives in a healthy way. We're not getting unbalanced in any way. So the virtue is chastity. The vice that it opposes is lust. So lust is a vice, and you've heard that word before. It's also one of the so-called 7 deadly sins or 7 capital vices, which again, I sort of think of as like the greatest hits of our sins as humans in our fallen nature. It's not necessarily that these are like worse than others, but that they're just sort of, first of all, they're all pretty broad categories. And second of all, they're just ones that we tend to fall into one or another of these 7. So the way that I like to define lust is when I use another person for my sexual gratification. Lust is when I use another person for my gratification. And that could be something physical, or it could just be looking at the person. It could be looking at a picture of the person. It can be very remote or mediated by media. Like it could be someone that I only see in the media and I don't actually know in real life. Using another person, their body, their appearance or whatever, for my own gratification. So there's nothing like relational in this. It's just me kind of like using them for my own selfish, greedy purposes. Okay, so which is also obviously also objectifying this other person, right? Treating the other person as an object, as a means to an end, as a tool, as an instrument, not treating the other person, as a whole being, of equal dignity to myself, created in the image likeness of God, etc., all that great stuff. And so that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to have lust. We do want to have chastity. And then we've all heard the word chastity before, and sometimes we want to put that on some people, but not everybody. It's like, well, you've got to be chaste, or like, I've got to be chaste because I'm a priest, but like other people don't because they're not. But there's different terms, like as a priest, I have to be celibate, which is to say that I don't get married. I can't get married. So not only am I not married, but I'm also like not looking to get married, unlike a single man who isn't married today, but could get married later, and so therefore can look for someone to get married to. Whereas I am not married and I'm not going to get married. So I am not looking for anybody to get married to. So there's a difference between those two, even though we're both unmarried. So that's celibacy. Celibacy is what I do, but chastity is for everyone. Chastity is for everyone. Sounds like a dorky slogan. So chastity is something for everyone. So whether you're married or you're not married, or you're a priest or a nun or whatever, you're hoping to get married, for everybody, chastity is the right use, the proper full integration of our sexuality, according to our state in life and where we are and what's going on. And so just like all the virtues, like, it depends on our situation and stuff. And so for, a married person, chastity is going to look different from a single person. And it can even look different at different stages of a marriage. So just kind of put it that way. So we've got a virtue and a vice. The virtue is what we're trying. The virtue and vice are opposed to each other. We want to do the virtue. We want to get rid of the vice. So chastity and lust. Any questions so far? Okay, let's dive in a little bit more. Okay. All right. So when we talked about the sacraments, we talked about the sacrament of holy matrimony. And I can't remember what I said about it. Again, yeah, it's hard for me to remember because I've like presented on things a bunch. So like, give me a break. So talked about marriage. Marriage is a beautiful sacrament. union of husband and wife, and the idea that in holy matrimony, the goal is for husband and wife to make a complete gift of themselves to the other. So the husband is making a total gift of himself to his wife. The wife is making a total gift of herself to her husband. And the wife is receiving the husband's total gift of himself. The husband is receiving the wife's total gift of herself. And so it's symmetric, mutual, and loving relationship of the highest form of love, the love of self-gift. And so, so that's what marriage is about. And that's one way of describing the beautiful mystery of marriage. And sort of similarly, we have like a similar approach applies to what I've heard delicately referred to as the marital embrace. So that's like the most polite term I've ever heard, the conjugal embrace. And so that's kind of fun to use. And so the idea here is far from lust and of using another person for one's own gratification, or of treating another person as an object, that in chastity, in the marital embrace, it's an act of a complete self-gift, of giving oneself completely to one's spouse, husband giving himself totally to his wife, wife giving herself totally to her husband. And so it's a physical expression of this love which husband and wife have, and they're expressing hopefully throughout their marriage. But this is one particular very intimate physical way that they can do that. That as it says in the Bible in the second chapter of Genesis, first or second chapter of Genesis, second. And then this passage is quoted by our Lord Jesus in the Gospels, and as well as other places in the New Testament, that God, that Adam and Eve were joined together, and the two became one flesh. They were no longer two, but one flesh. So this idea of this intimate union between husband and wife, and that this union is expressed in the so-called marital embrace. And so this kind of sets the scene for how we understand things, that sexual relations are something good and beautiful and positive. They're not something bad or negative or only to be tolerated for the procreation of the species. It's a very positive vision, something very beautiful, but also something that that needs to be taken care of, right? We don't just throw this around like whatever. This is something really beautiful. We want to respect and take care of and honor and uphold. And so so this is kind of like how the church sees our human sexuality and the way that it is expressed in holy matrimony. So any questions up to this point? I really feel like so yeah, are there any questions? Okay. Okay. So a couple of ways of thinking about this marriage and the marital embrace. I'll keep using that term because I like it. Is that we can, is that the church has kind of identified two things that, two different dimensions, two different things that are going on here, kind of in both marriage and the marital embrace, and that is that these kind of two goals of uniting husband and wife. So marriage in general, and the marital act are hopefully drawing husband and wife closer together, ever closer union with each other. And then that's what we call the unitive dimension, the unitive dimension. And then the other dimension is the procreative, and that's that marriage in general and the marital act in particular tend towards having offspring and then raising any children that are born to the marriage. So right away I want to say like that when you get married, you're not like obliged to have children. There's no quota of like you have to have this many or you have to have more than 0 or like there's no scorecard there, but that marriage is ordered towards the union of husband and wife and to the procreation and the upbringing of children. This is what marriage is about. This is part of what marriage is about. I want to ever say that I've exhausted something as big as marriage. But this is what marriage is about, and this is what the marital act, the marital embrace is about as well. And so that we see it in light of these two things, never just one to the exclusion of the other, that they're always both there. And yeah, this makes, I'm sort of debating with myself how to explain this. So I'm just going to talk and we'll see how much it makes sense and we'll come around if we need to. So this kind of makes sense. Like the conjugal act is something incredibly intimate, and it's also something very powerful. There's some who propose that sometimes it's not a big deal. It's like, it's no big deal. Like we can just, whatever, and it's cool. As long as, everybody's in agreement and nobody's getting hurt or whatever. And it's like totally cool. And it's just like chill. And we can just like do this. And like, there could be activity like outside of even having a relationship. It's just like don't hardly even know each other and so on. But the church says like, this is something really like big and lofty and important and intimate and powerful. And so we don't want to be casual with this, with our sexuality, with marital relations. And so that's why we kind of see them kind of in this big context of within marriage and with these unitive and procreative dimensions. So, okay. Another another way of kind of thinking about marriage and conjugal relations is with the kind of these 4 different aspects, which is kind of a slogan. You can kind of hear these listed off, which is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. So these 4 terms, which someone conveniently came up with the alliteration of free, total, faithful, and fruitful. So free is that we freely enter marriage. Bride and groom freely choose to marry each other. There's no coercion or force on either part or on either of them, and that they freely enter the marriage and they freely live out the marriage. And total, that they are giving themselves completely over, not just partially, but completely giving themselves over to each other in that self-gift. Free, total, faithful. Now, the faithful is kind of implied by the total. If I'm giving myself totally to one, then how can I give myself to another at the same time? It's incompatible. So fidelity, faithfulness, free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Fruitful is that part of being open to new life, as that procreative dimension that marriage is ordered to, in addition to the union of husband and wife, to the procreation and the upbringing of children. Okay, so I feel like I'm kind of going around and around. What am I missing? Okay. All right, it's fine. So, yeah. So, I feel like I'm going to jump to this other. Are there any questions? Yeah.
I don't know, it's a big point that sort of strays away a little from the main point of discussion, but I think it's important. What does the church teach about homosexuality, and what, as Catholics, ought we to do about homosexuals in our families or social circles?
That's a great question for the end. Totally punting that to the end. Thank you. That's like, yeah, like that's hopefully when it all comes together, that piece will make sense. If I do my job well, then it'll make sense. Okay. I feel like I'm missing some. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely missing something. I'm not like factually, hopefully, but just trying to like put together this like beautiful vision and have you all fall in love with it. So you'd be like, yes, you're right. You're so good at explaining things. But not me personally, but just like the church's vision is really beautiful and good. And so when we see this, then we see that that we only want to engage in sexual relations in when we can do so in a way that that sort of respects our own that our own selves, our own sexuality, our own bodies, and that of the other person, and that we want to do so in a way that respects the power and the dignity and the beauty of this capacity that we have, so that when we join with another, we do so to ratify our wedding vows, to consummate our marriage, to truly unite ourselves more completely. And we do so open to the possibility of receiving the gift of new life and prepared for that possibility as well by having already established the household of at least a husband and wife. Perhaps we also have other children. So yeah, basically the way I'm trying to explain this is that there's this really beautiful positive vision for human sexuality and for the marital embrace in particular. And that when we can see this, we can see how other stuff just doesn't fit in with that, and how it just doesn't correspond, and how and therefore these are things that we don't want to do. Even though we can be attracted to doing them, that they are not for our benefit. They're not for the benefit of others. If other people are involved, that they actually harm us because they are separating and pulling out the different elements of our sexuality from each other rather than having ourselves properly integrated. Yeah, I just feel like I'm not being convincing, but we'll see. So let's look at some things. Let's start going down that list of all the things you're not supposed to do. That's easy. That's easy. Just like let me just say all the stuff you're not supposed to do. Right. So, or one thing I can say is so chastity, virtue, lust, vice. Chastity is the good one. Lust is the bad one. Another way to describe lust is when we are seeking sexual gratification apart from its unitive purpose or apart from its procreative purpose. You're sort of like, I'm just seeking like this gratification, this high, apart from the meaning that sexuality has. The unitive, uniting, and the procreative, open to children dimensions. So, things you're not supposed to do. I got a whole list. And let's start easy. Start easy by like doing things that everybody, by listening to things that hopefully everybody agrees to. So obviously, any kind of sexual abuse, any kind of sexual assault, any kind of rape, right out. That's terrible. We don't want that. Even worse if minors are involved, or if it's an adult victimizing a minor or other vulnerable person or whatever. Obviously, that's really terrible. That goes against what is supposed to be this beautiful uniting of husband and wife, just gets distorted into this terrible violation of another person, or robbing them of their dignity, their worth, using them as an instrument rather than recognizing and honoring their incredible dignity. And even for the perpetrator, it's just like just selfishly just seeking to kind of like scratch that itch rather than being open to the beautiful possibility that this dimension of ourselves offers to us, and when it's properly expressed in marriage. So yeah, obviously that's bad, but it's also kind of helps us to understand why it's evil, why it's wrong, why it's a sin, and then that almost helps us to understand what things are supposed to look like when they're done right. Another thing that you're not supposed to do, polygamy. So you can only be married to one person at a time. One person at a time. Pick one. And if your spouse dies, then you probably can get married to somebody else. But you can only be married to one person at a time. No accumulation of spouses. So we're talking about, yeah. So another one that you're not supposed to do, incest. Don't do incest. So we're going to describe incest would be relations with close relatives, so closely related to you, such that you wouldn't be able to get married to them. You're not allowed to marry your close relatives, so therefore you're not allowed to have relations with close relatives under any circumstances. Another one is adultery, which is actually what the Sixth Commandment actually says. So adultery would be when a married person has relations with someone else. Both parties could be married, or just one party. Multiple parties. So whatever. If at least one party is married, then that constitutes adultery. So that's again taking the relations out of marriage, but then also it's an offense against that marriage that this person, at least the one person has, and that their relationship with their spouse. Related to, so yeah, and then kind of continuing down the line, fornication. Fornication is the term that refers to two unmarried people having relations. So if you haven't figured it out yet, the idea is you can have marital relations with the person you're married to. You can have conjugal relations with your conjugal person. There's a word in Italian for your spouse is like your conjugate, something like that. But anyway, you're married to your spouse, and you can have relations with your spouse. And if you're not married to anybody, then you don't have relations with anybody. So that's one simple way of putting things. And you can only be married to one person at a time. So it's not a lot. It's not a big universal possibility here. So you're either married or you're not. And if you are married, you're only married to one person. And so you're only having relations with one person in a given era of your life. And should you have successive spouses due to death of your spouse, then those successive marriages, then you can have relations with your spouse, obviously. So fornication is two people who are not married. That's also excluded, not to be done. And then kind of related is just various situations where people are living as though married, but they're not actually married. A colorful term for this is shacking up. Don't do that. If you want to get married, get married. If you don't want to get married, don't do the marriage stuff. Pick one. And that's easy to say, but yeah, obviously, I don't understand that life is complicated. So, but we wanted to pursue, virtue here and doing the right thing, and not slipping into things that can be selfish or just wanting to kind of not commit to anything, but still get whatever I want or whatever. It's if I want to do this, then I want to go all in. Then I want to okay, I want to give myself completely to this person in the marital embrace. Therefore, I also want to get married to this person. I also want to spend my whole life with this person. I also want to be open to the possibility of having children with this person, raising children with this person. So this is the person that, I want to completely give myself to spend the rest of my life with. This is the person that I want to help me raise our children together. If I want to to have relations with this person in this way, then it's like the whole package. And so we don't try to like exclude that and say, well, I'm not ready, or I don't want like a bunch of these parts, but I do like this part. And so I'm just going to grab this right now. That if we are going to have marital relations, we're going to do so in marriage. Okay. Another thing is on this list would be pornography. So pornography is just a great occasion for lust, right? So pornography is when we have objectifying material where it can have various formats and media or whatever, but the idea is that I'm using another person for my own gratification, right? And so everything related to that, or yeah, I don't want to try to exhaustively list the various things that can happen, but we've all been on the internet. There's all kinds of stuff out there. There's stuff in real life of like the CD establishments and so on. So like that's right out, because we're not using other people. People are not objects. People are not instruments for my benefit. People are human persons made in the image and likeness of God with inestimable dignity that should never be violated. So that, no to pornography and that whole universe of stuff. Fun fact, what about art that contains nudity? Church says, okay. Famous quote, if I'm remembering this correctly, by Pope St. John Paul II, he says that in pornography, the problem is not that they are showing too much, it's that they are showing too little. It's like there's a lot of skin, but that they're not showing the dignity of the people involved. Whereas if you're doing art well, then you're showing truth and goodness and beauty, and so you can depict the human form naked, nude, in the nude, and you can do so in a way that reflects the dignity of the human person and all of that. And so without violating that, so that can be a beautiful thing. So that is a possibility when it's done well. Okay, continuing down our list here, things not to do. Another one is masturbation. So masturbation is going to be a stimulation of self for sexual gratification. And it's going to be deliberate as well, just like all sins have to be deliberate. And so, I said, like, if you're not married, then you're not having relations with anybody else. And hey, you're not doing solo or whatever they call it either. So masturbation, even one person by themselves is out, because that's it's a misuse of our sexual faculties. It's a distortion of what it's for. Like our sexuality is meant for relation, for connecting with another person, for being united to my spouse, and for the being open to the possibility of bringing about new life. And every act of like self-gratification, of masturbation, is like ultimately frustrating, because this part of my body, this part of my being, it's intended for relationship, for union with another, and perhaps also leading to the procreation of a third person. And in masturbation, we can stimulate nerve endings and we can bring about a particular biological response, but there's no relationship there. And so just because that the bankruptcy of it in that dimension leaves us empty ultimately, that part is missing. And this thing that's meant to do this, we just sort of turn around and we kind of shove it in another direction, and it doesn't really work very well because it's not meant to do that. It's meant to do this. And so that's why masturbation is wrong and it's a sin. And why? Because our sexuality is ordered to something more and greater and better. And so that's not a commonly held opinion. So well, most of this isn't in society at large, but this is how we understand things. And yeah, this is also really hard, which I hope to also talk about at the end. Okay, okay. That was a list of a whole bunch of things that we're not supposed to do. And hopefully they kind of fit together, vaguely related, like the marital embrace is reserved to marriage. And so all of its various forms outside of marriage, not okay, whether with another person, whether with several other persons, or with no other persons, that we, that our sexual faculties are ordered towards marriage, to being expressed in marriage. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to there's so much stuff. I'm trying to jam it all in here. Okay, so whirlwind tour through another part, and then hopefully we can come around to the part that everybody really wants to know. So I've mentioned repeatedly this whole the ordination of our sexual faculties and of the marital embrace to the procreation of children, and marriage is also ordered to that. So I'll just talk about children for a sec and kind of flesh this out a little bit more. One way that I like to describe it is that because often we're just thinking about ourselves, we're like, what's best for me? What I want, what's best for me, and maybe this relationship with another person is I feel is what's best for me or whatever. And I'm thinking about myself. If we kind of turn our perspective around and say, what's the best for children? What's the best for children? What's the best environment for children to grow up in? What's the best environment for children to be born into, and stuff like that? And we quickly say, okay, a nurturing, loving environment with grown-ups who are responsible, who are taking care of the child, and teaching them to share, and taking care of them in all the different ways, and all of the different dimensions that we need to be taken care of when we're growing up. And when we kind of think through that, we can kind of so okay, so there should be loving adults who love the child, and maybe more than one would be nice. Maybe it'd be nice to have it'd be nice to have a woman, so then a little girl can see an example of a woman, a role model, be okay, a really good woman in my life, and that shows me how to grow up to be a good woman and my dignity as a woman. And a little boy can see a really good example of a woman who's a really good woman living virtuously, and say okay, that's what women are like, and this is how I should, learning the dignity of women and how to treat women well and all that good stuff. And then having a great example of a really good man as well, a man who's living virtuously, living a good life. He can show his son how to be a good man, how to grow up to be a good man, show his daughter what a good man looks like, how to relate to men, how men should relate to her, all that kind of good stuff. So that kind of helps, and it would help. So it makes sense that what if these two were not just unrelated? What if the man and woman, they loved each other as well as loving the child, and they were committed to each other for life, and also committed to the child for life, and all of a sudden it starts looking a lot like marriage. And so that's my little game. It's probably falls apart if you pick at it too much, but the idea that if you were to say what's the ideal habitat for children to grow up in, you kind of start from there, from the perspective of the children, you might quickly describe marriage, or at least what marriage should be. Now, obviously, marriage in real life plays out in many different ways, and there are a lot of imperfect, all of the actual marriages are imperfect, obviously. But when we're talking about what we're called to and the sort of the ideals that we're striving towards, we kind of start to see oh, marriage, yeah, a husband and a wife who have given themselves completely to each other for life, and who are so committed to each other, and they love each other, and their love overflows into do their procreation of children, and then they love their children and they raise their children in a loving, nurturing environment, and raising them in in all the various dimensions, and also hopefully giving them a good example of a woman and a man, of a husband and a wife. And so to kind of like say the same thing in kind of the opposite way, if you think of like a really good marriage is a great place for a child to grow up in. When you think about what happens when a marriage falls apart, when a couple gets divorced, and that's considered like one of the worst things that can happen to you growing up. It's just like, that it's always like, divorce, it's miserable for the man and the woman when the relationship breaks down. Like divorce is always this, it comes in very many forms, but it's usually pretty lousy. It's probably a really miserable experience for everybody involved. But like the worst is not for the man or the woman, but it's for the children involved, right? That it can be so traumatic, and depending on what their ages are and all the different circumstances, but it's just like really bad scene because this relationship between the husband and wife broke down in this way. So if the ideal is like this beautiful marriage, then yeah, when you don't have that, then that's really bad for kids. And so we see children as a gift from God. That children are that having children is like a participation in God's fatherhood for married couples. It's not like this burden, like, oh, I don't want to have kids. They're so messy and expensive, and like, nor are children like a right, like I demand to have kids and like you have to give them to me. They're just like, I'm open to children. If we should have children, I will consider them a blessing from God, a gift from God, and do our best to raise them well. So, yes. So related to all of this, I'm just gonna throw these out here. We're quickly running out of time, and so I'm kind of panicking. In marriage, in the marital embrace, we are open to new life. And so there's another list of things that we don't do that would be saying no to that openness to new life. And so one of them is contraception. There it is. One of them is contraception, and also sterilization. Sterilization can also be considered a form of mutilation, of harming ourselves, of damaging a perfectly well-functioning part of our bodies. If sterilization results because of a medical procedure that I need to treat a medical condition, then so be it. That's not what I was trying to do. That's just a side effect of that treatment. But deliberate sterilization or birth control are say no to that openness to new life. And so then it kind of separates the procreative and the unitive dimensions of the marital embrace, that when husband and wife are joined together in the marital embrace, they're giving themselves completely over to each other, including their fecundity, their fertility, the possibility of having children, of having new life. Whether or not that actually happens, whether or not perhaps they're both sterile, one of them sterile, or obviously not every encounter results in a pregnancy, but that each time that husband and wife are open to new life. They don't put anything in the way of that. They don't hold anything back from their complete gift of themselves, not even this procreative capacity. And again, not to say that there's like quota, like that you have to have children or you have to have a certain number of children, but that there's that openness to new life. And just to like mention, so you've heard it, most fertility treatments are also not okay because they distort things. I know I'm just saying like, yeah, marriage ordered towards children. So why can't I like go to the doctor's office and have them do the procedure or the thingy or the whatever so that we can have kids, because otherwise we won't be able to have kids. Because children have a right to be born of their mother and father who love each other, are married to each other, who are going to love the child and raise the child. And so, yeah, most fertility treatments are considered just sort of like, again, that separation of, so we're going to do the procreation part apart from the marital embrace. So we don't want to like take away do the marital embrace without the procreation part. We're like, well, I don't want that part. Let's set it aside. But also you want to run off and try to do the procreation part separate from the marital embrace. So that's just mentioning it. Sorry, that's not even the proper explanation. Yes. Okay. Fine. Somewhat disappointed by how poorly I described all of that. Let's get to the best part. So what does this all mean? And how does this all bear to those people who experience an attraction to members of the same sex? What does this have to do with men who find themselves attracted to men, to women who find themselves attracted to women, for people who identify with any part of LGBT plus or any of these various groups or categories? How do we understand that? How does all that fit into here? So if I'd done a good job, then it would be clear from everything we've learned in this course that, first, we're all made in the image and likeness of God. We all have this ineffable dignity, and that applies to absolutely everyone. No one is excluded from that. That applies to absolutely everyone. Cannot emphasize that enough. And that we're all called to communion with God and to become saints and all this wonderful good stuff that God wants for us. And we're all called to live lives of virtue and to be, have these excellences and to be the best versions of ourselves and all that kind of good stuff. And we're all called to chastity, to living our sexuality in an integral way and not being ruled by our sexuality, but rather having mastery over ourselves and all that kind of good stuff. And so here's where I typically point out that the church doesn't have any separate or special rules for people in different categories. It has the same rules and ideas about chastity for everyone. And I think philosophically that means that implies no discrimination, because it would be discriminatory to say well, here's the rules for these people and here's the rules for everybody else. Now we have oh, okay, well, which group am I in and which rules apply to me? Whereas if it's well, there's one set of rules for everybody, okay, now we're all on the same footing. Okay, that's a very polite way for you to put it. But when we kind of look at the implications of this, then we see that as I've tried to explain, and I'm not going to say that I did so successfully, that the marital embrace belongs within marriage of husband and wife. And so those of us who aren't married aren't doing the married people thing. And so what about those who experience attraction to members of the same sex? Well, if you are not married, then you're not doing the married thing. And so does that mean that I can't get married or can I get married? What's going on? Well, the way the church actually sees it, and you might find this funny, is that if there's a man who is attracted to men, he can get married to a woman. That nothing stands in the way of that. Might not be a good idea, but the church doesn't say no, you can't do that. The church says, well, if you ever you go through kind of there's all the qualifications for can you get married? Are you old enough and whatever? You're not closely related. If everything else is okay, then yeah, might be a terrible idea. But the church doesn't say no to you or push you away or anything like that. And so in that sense, those who find themselves attracted to members of the same sex can get married, but they might not want to. I wouldn't expect them to want to in that way, and it might not be a good idea or whatever. So that's a possibility. But we can also see that because of marriage, of its nature of being this complete self-gift, of giving myself completely to my spouse, including my sexuality, including my potential fertility, whether or not I'm actually fertile in reality, wanting to be joined in perfect union with the other, wanting to have that one flesh union that we see in the Bible, wanting to be open to new life with this other person, then then that is going to be between husband and wife, between man and woman, the two sexes who are made, in the image and likeness of God, with the complementarity with each other, who together are theoretically capable, even if these two people aren't actually capable, theoretically capable of bringing about new life, of participating in God's creation in that way. And then, of course, also being drawn closer to each other in union with each other through their complete gifts of themselves. And so this is kind of the way that the church thinks about it. It's not so much of like a you're bad, or anything like trying to like exclude or push away or stigmatize or anything like that. It's just this positive vision of human sexuality and of marriage. And not everyone is called to marriage. I'm an example of someone who's not called to marriage. And it's like, well, you chose not to get married. I mean, I chose to accept my vocation to the priesthood, and then also to accept the implication that that means I'm not getting married. Just like when a man gets married to this woman, he's also choosing to not get married to anybody other woman, unless this one dies, then he can, whatever. So that marriage isn't necessarily for everyone. Our Lord says this in the Gospels. The disciples ask him about divorce, like, hey, is it okay to divorce? And he's like, nope. And then they're like, wow, if it's just like that, then maybe we shouldn't get married. And he says, marriage isn't for everybody. And so, marriage isn't for everyone. It's a very beautiful thing to which some are called, many are called, but not necessarily everyone. And so this is kind of the way that we see things. And so hopefully this comes across as that the church isn't trying to discriminate against anybody or to push away or exclude anybody or just label and then put into a box, but rather to promote everyone and to help everyone understand their incredible, ineffable dignity made in the image and likeness of God, and the beautiful complementarity of the sexes and the beautiful vocation of marriage. And if you're called to it, that's a really beautiful thing, and to strive to having a beautiful marriage, and raising your kids in that and all that kind of good stuff. And if we're not called to marriage, then to living beautiful lives of virtue, however we are called to live. And again, so that chastity is for everyone. So chastity, living out our sexuality with integrity and having properly integrated, whether we're married or we're not, or we're single, or we're looking to get married, or single and not looking to get married, whatever the situation is that we find ourselves in. So how dissatisfying is that? Are there any questions about that kind of stuff, or about anything else? And I also realize that I've gone way over time, but I don't have to go anywhere.
It's obviously what a lot of people system teach the church, but this really tell me what to do about, say, my 16-year-old brother is homosexual.
Right. So the kind of a follow-on question is like, okay, that's a beautiful theory, maybe, well, it is a beautiful theory. I didn't necessarily explain it beautifully, but then how do we actually, first of all, is assuming that we're on board, which I don't expect everybody to be on board the first time they hear that, this is something that takes a while to sink in. You're like, whoa. But assuming that we're on board and we're like, yeah, okay, I got that. But then what happens when I'm face to face with somebody and I'm like, hey, right, it's not easy, because in our culture we have this dichotomy, we have this, what do you call it, polarization, where you're either like all the way this way or all the way this way. And we find this in like many issues, including, how to think about the people who identify as gay. And, one pole is, one end is everything affirming and everything wonderful. And the other end is like everything condemning and, super negative. And we're sort of like there's these, and it's as if society says there's only two ways to think about this subject. You're not allowed to be anywhere between these two, and you're not allowed to be anywhere off of that line between the two. And the church's view is is quite different from both of these. And so I feel like people aren't ready to hear what we have to say just because it's so different. They're like, wait, are you in this camp or that camp? And I'm like, I'm not in either one. I was like, wait, no, which one are you in? It's like, no, I'm not trying to tell you something different. And so it's kind of like this like status quo that becomes an obstacle to understanding and being able to convey anything different. And so obviously we want to start with the positive, which is with everything we understand about human dignity. And if we're talking about someone in our lives, someone that we have a relationship with, obviously affirming our relationship, our friendship, how much we love the person, all of that good stuff, how much we want what's best for that person. So we always want what's best for everybody. We may have different ideas of what's best, but we always we can say that we do want what's best for everybody, and kind of starting there. And then, obviously, like they say that people learn best what they almost already know. People learn best what they almost already know. And so I kind of feel like the church's teaching on human sexuality is just like way out there from what people already know. And so it's hard to just like say, hey, check this out. You kind of have to like build way out to it. And that takes a lot of time. And like, why would people just like sit and pay attention to me while I try to like explain them all this stuff? And so a lot of it is just trying to be a good witness, trying to be like the best Christian that I can be so that people don't see me as hypocritical or inconsistent with the values that I claim to be living by, promoting and living by. And then just trying to be, having a good relationship with this particular person in my life. And then there's various resources and like, stuff that you can find. There's some really awesome stuff. It's worth mentioning. And there's something called the Courage Apostolate. And so it's an apostolate to people. The phrase that's used is same-sex attraction. People who experience same-sex attraction to live chastely, to be the best Christians that they can be, and it's in a really positive way. It's not trying to be repressive or like you're bad or whatever. And so they have really great resources for everybody in the various ways that we relate and stuff like that. So, yes.
So, like you kind of said, if they're called to live chastely, what does like having a couple of two same-sex attracted people who decide to like adopt a child?
Right. So that's so the question is
the Supreme Court, the case in New York that's going to the Supreme Court where they won't let same-sex couples adopt.
Right. So, okay. So, question is about same-sex couple seeking to adopt a child. There was a reference made to a current court case. I'm not familiar with the court case, so I can't comment on that. The general matter, yeah, this is a tricky one of like what should public policy be, and how what should the general rule be for everybody? What should like the government's position be, and then what space is there for people to have their different views, and adoption agencies being able to operate according to their own principles, their religiously motivated principles. So, and then just like adoption in general is just like a crazy idea that, normally people just have kids and like, you don't get to pick who your family is going to be. And like, maybe you have great parents, maybe you have terrible parents, maybe it's an awesome environment. Maybe it's like, oh, whoops, we weren't expecting that to happen. And, there's all kinds of circumstances, but then in adoption, it's like all of a sudden this very like artificial environment where we can like sit down and think through and plan like, okay, little Johnny needs adoptive parents or parent or whatever. Who's that going to be? And then you get to come up with criteria of who you'll consider and who you won't consider. Do you consider individuals, or do you only consider couples? Do you consider only younger couples? Do you consider older couples? And yeah, it's kind of like, I've been meaning to like look into like how adoption works in general and like what the criteria are and how that's evolved over time. Because you kind of like, you think like, well, now that we're sitting down and doing it, like we want to do like the best possible thing, but like, what would that even be? What would that even mean? What would that look like? So I'm kind of like not answering your question, but sort of answering your question, that part of that criteria could be saying like, wow, it would be really awesome if there was a mom and a dad, because men and women aren't exactly the same. And saying that they're not the same doesn't mean that there's a difference in value between them. We're every single human being, regardless of whatever category you can be put into, is of inestimable value, of an incredible dignity. But it's the church's vision is like it's great to have a great mom, and it's great to have a great dad. Obviously, there are many lovely families that don't have that, but that's a beautiful thing. And because adoption is kind of like this artificial environment where you're putting people together, maybe that is a possibility there. So, but I would actually like to learn more about that myself. Thanks for that question. Other questions? These are good and make me stressed. Yes.
Sorry, so there was a question. What if you're infertile? Can you adopt a kid?
Oh yeah, thank you.
Like what happens
Yeah.
if your natural fertility is like not a thing? What are you supposed to do?
Okay, thank you. This is super worth. Yeah, so I've used all these words about marriage and family and human sexuality and stuff, and I managed to neglect a very fundamental thing. If man and woman get married and they love each other, and when they love each other very much, then they express their love in the marital embrace, and they are open to new life in that. And then what if they discover that they're actually infertile, that they cannot have kids? Can they adopt? Answer, yes, big time yes. So in general, Catholic Church's position on adoption, yeah, that's great to connect kids who need parents to parents who want kids. And so, yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Like when the church says that we have this openness to new life, that means open to new life. And if we can't have kids, then, okay, then I guess we're not going to have like our own biological kids. But we can certainly adopt, and that's a really beautiful thing. That obviously, again, no obligation to do that. Like, there's no quota on how many kids you have to have or whatever. But yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that, because it pointed out that I forgot to say that. So thank you.
Pamela said, so can anyone adopt?
So can anyone adopt? Or should anyone adopt? I think this is me. So yeah, there's I think, and I'm not sure, I haven't like seen anything definitive about the church's teaching on this. So this is me like extrapolating, so which means that I could totally be wrong. But I would think that the church's position would be that that the ideal adoptive parents are a husband and wife, who are married, love each other, and they want their love to overflow into children. So I guess that's the way I would answer that. Any other questions about anything? Yeah.
What about natural family planning?
Hey, so yeah, because I was just racing through because I was running out of time, but now we're way over time, so it doesn't really matter about time. What about natural family planning? Somebody just like, so when so I said like no to contraception, no to sterilization procedures. It's like, okay, so like what am I supposed to have like as many children as biologically possible? Like, what's the deal? So the natural family planning is this term for a whole bunch of stuff, but the basic idea is husband and wife, they love each other very, very much, and they express their love to each other in the marital embrace, And when they do so, it always has the unitive and the procreative dimensions. That it's always seeking to draw them into closer union with each other, and it's always open to new life. But even while being open to new life and being open to new life in every act, in every occasion, not just like in general in our marriage, but like every time being open to new life, we can also say, you know, we would like to postpone having children for a while, or we would like to space out having children. So we postpone before having our first child, and after having the first child, have a certain amount of time before the next child. And if, you know, that can be very, obviously there can be very legitimate reasons for doing that, and that can be compatible with being open to new life. What natural family planning allows us to do is to understand the natural fertility cycles that happen. So it's a lot of biology, and which is fun. It's science. You get to do science at home with your own bodies. Some people think that's kind of gross or annoying or whatever. I think it's really cool, but I don't get to do that because I'm not married. But the idea is to understand, like, okay, like there's only certain times that a woman can conceive. And so if we kind of pay attention to that, then we can plan so that if we are trying to achieve pregnancy, we go towards the times when that is more likely. And if we are trying to postpone pregnancy, we go towards the time that is less likely, all while being open to new life. And that, if, we're trying to postpone, but if pregnancy occurs tonight, that's great too. We accept children as a gift from God, and it's not exactly what we planned, but we're married and we love each other, and we're open to new life. And so, when you think about it in the case of like that, this is like within marriage, and that these two are like they married each other because they're open to having children with each other, then it's not like a disaster if pregnancy occurs. Like, it's real bad news if like we're not actually in like a relationship, and we're definitely not planning on going down that road, and so we do not want to have kids, and then surprise, there's pregnancy. Then it's like crisis, and that's like real, right? So, but if we reserve relations for within marriage, then all of a sudden it's not as big of a deal, because like we're already in this situation. So natural family planning helps us to understand the periods of fertility, the natural periods of fertility, not to be confused with the so-called rhythm method, which is not very reliable. But the natural family planning is really cool because you get to like take these scientific measurements every single day, and you kind of chart out the cycles, and then you get to kind of see like that there's like these biological, like there's these signs that you can see, like, okay, if I see this, then I know that this is what's going on. And so even if cycles aren't like Swiss precise on like a regular schedule, that the variation in the schedule can be like observed. It's kind of like, maybe this is a decent example. It's kind of like a decent analogy. Maybe it's kind of like predicting the weather. The weather isn't always the same. It's not always like sunny for 3 days, then rainy for 3 days. But if you like pay attention to this and that and the other, you can say like, oh yeah, tomorrow it's going to rain, or tomorrow it's going to be sunny. And so it's vaguely similar idea of being able to understand, how all that fun stuff works, and to be able to achieve pregnancy if we're looking to have a child, or to postpone if that's what we're looking to do. Does that help?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
my follow-up to that is, how does acting on, using natural family planning, stay within the openness?
Right. So how's it different? Yeah. How's it not just contraception? Or how's it just like not a different means of contraception? And so a lot of it has to do with the mindset that, and because, sometimes you'll find some people who are secular, they're not Catholic, or they're not religious or whatever, and they want like organic birth control, and are like, oh yeah, rather than using these substances or whatever, like we're gonna do this like totally natural thing. It's like, yeah. So they have their mindset is to contracept, to be closed to new life. And so yeah, this is a means, this is a tool which can be used in various ways. And so yeah, the important thing is having that mindset, having that openness to new life, And a lot of that, and I would say, yeah, one big part of that is saying like, okay, I'm trying to postpone having kids, or we're trying to postpone having kids. But if we have a kid tonight, that's all right. But it's not what we planned for. It's not what's, fits in our little 5-year plan diagram of how we organized our lives, but life doesn't always work that way. And we'll be totally okay if that happens. And so I think that's kind of like part of that mindset. Cool.
So
Great
in our
questions.
examination of consciousness within like this little thing,
Uh-huh.
so it says, did I make use of marriage only on those days when I knew offspring would not likely be conceived? So how is that different?
Yeah, great question. What that might be, I'm not sure what exactly that's referring to in that particular case, because I would put it more on the mindset than on the practical
I
things.
skipped the first part, said, did I without grave reason?
Okay,
What's considered grave reason then? Is it like, I don't want a kid right now? That's a grave reason.
so there are some times where it's like, you cannot get pregnant. Like you're capable of getting pregnant, but you should not get pregnant because it'll be a real bad scene, either because of some like medical condition with the woman, that pregnancy will just be like it'll just be real bad, or there's a condition that can be passed to the child, and it's like, don't want that, and so therefore I welcome new life should it happen, but because of this like super serious condition that we are trying to not have kids because of that.
And is that like
Think-
okay?
I think that's how that goes. I could very well be wrong. Sorry that I can't explain that better.
I'm just wondering. So when I was
Yeah,
reading this, I was
yeah.
like, I don't know if that was.
Yeah. And to kind of put it another way too, sometimes previously there was a debate as to, okay, the church is against contraception, and then as various contraception techniques kind of came out and technologies, it was like, well, is the problem like because there's some so-called barrier methods? Is it like that there's a barrier in the way, and if that we were to remove the barrier but had some other chemical or pharmaceutical method, that would be okay, because the real problem is the barrier, and so now there's no barrier, right? So it's okay, right? It's like, well, no, that's not. It's not this technique or that technique. It's not the technology. It's the mindset. That's the way that I explain it. That's my understanding.
Is it okay to like have kids, like you can bear children, you have children, and then you also adopt? Like you can, because I think I read in the catechism one time that it was like you should only adopt if you absolutely physically cannot have your own children, but maybe I'm remembering that wrong.
I do not. Okay, so basically the question is it okay to for a married couple to have kids and adopt kids? As far as I know, that's totally cool. Yeah, adoption is not exclusively for those who cannot bear children naturally. As far as I know, I would love it if you found other ways.
Rather than the specifics of the method, it's the fact that you were misusing the sexual.
Right. So yeah. So like the big idea is that our sexual faculties are oriented towards the union of husband and wife and possible procreation of children, and everything that kind of turns it away from that, because we're gonna call it ordered to this, and everything that turns away from that, disordered. Not like you have a disorder, like you have a mental condition or a disease or something, but just that it's been pulled away from where it's ordered to, and so that's depending on how far and when in which direction. Those are all going to be things that we're trying to avoid. We're trying to go to what it's ordered to.
Yeah, this is kind of theory-wise. So, given that the church doesn't have a problem separating genders and how they're treated in certain circumstances, why, like in the case of sexuality, when one gender, like it produces life and the other, like self-satisfaction doesn't, why are they treated the same? Or why are these like two well, there's clearly biological differences, why do we still include it under one umbrella with like consequences? Or
I'm afraid I don't understand.
okay,
the
so like
question.
with male satisfaction, you're losing, like that leads to self-satisfaction you're potentially losing life because that results in the losing of something that holds the potential to create life. Versus females, it's different. That a female doesn't lead to the potential of creating life. So why, like, wouldn't one potentially be different? Or I guess it comes down to
Right. So I think it's just, I guess, see if this answer satisfies you, that the idea is that our sexual faculties and our bodies and our private parts, they're ordered, towards this union and procreation. And so any other use we don't want to do that. We don't want to distort what they're for or misuse them in that way.
I'm just like
Yeah, because
that aspect of the female isn't necessarily needed for procreation.
right. But it is good if it all comes together. Which Pope St. John Paul II did say ideally, when married couples are doing the married couple thing, that would be that both husband and wife would also experience the physical pleasure that can come from that shouldn't be just cast aside or ignored or something like that, because it's not merely utilitarian of we need to propagate our species, so okay, let's do our duty. So yeah. I guess I'd put it under how I sort of described lust as, I described lust as using another, but I guess you could also more broadly say it was sort of using or abusing my own sexual faculties, just for my own gratification, apart from its ordination to unity and procreation. Does that help a little bit? Because it's not quite so closely connected to the physiology and the biology. I think so. That's a good clarifying question. Any other questions? This is great. This is like marathon round, grill the priest. I like getting stumped, even though it makes me uncomfortable. All right. What else did I skip? Let's see here. Chastity is hard. Chastity is really hard. Lust is that's why it's one of the 7 capital sins, because it's really easy to fall into, and it's really attractive at least, of the 7 deadly sins, there's usually one or several that we're ooh, I like that one. And so this is really hard. It's not, the church isn't trying to impose some heavy burden on us, but invite us to, this beautiful vision. And obviously God wants to help us to do this. It's not something that we have to do alone, by gritting our teeth. And that, part of why it's hard is because the way we understand things in the church is so different from the way the rest of the secular society understands things. And so when we're, have the help of other people and we're in good environments where we're all trying to help each other, then it's easier to do that. Just like with, let's say, consumption of alcohol, it's easier to avoid excessive drinking if I'm around people who are not excessive drinking. And it's harder to avoid that if I'm always around people who are excessively drinking. So that kind of thing plays a factor as well. But just to acknowledge that, it's hard. It's this whole struggle. There's a whole section in the Catechism about how this is something that we actually have to work at, and that we also rely upon God's grace, and all our prayer and all the sacraments and all that stuff. That's all to help us to do this as well. Yeah.
This was the other one question on the examination of consciousness. So it says, do I have friendships at habitual occasions? Oh wait, never mind. I read that wrong. Never mind.
Cool.
I was am I prepared to end them? And I was wait, do I have to end my friendships with people who are in habitual relationships of, okay.
Yeah, just
those relationships.
if I have close friends that are just always getting me into, like, me hanging out with them is always getting me into trouble, then like, and then maybe if I get to where I'm like nerves of steel and I can like enter into dangerous situations without falling into temptation to sin, then maybe I can go back there. But until I'm ready to do that, maybe I just need to. So.
However, it's just a frustration of living as a Catholic in the modern world, post-Christian world, feels like times.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's like, Father Eric was mentioning humbly, that just being around people, faith reinforces faith. And having, again, I always come back to this with the example of my family as a child, a literal child, I don't know if he came out as homosexual to the family. The first thing that comes to your mind is, where did this come from? Because evidently somewhere in this young is thinking about these things. These are things that are ingrained in them, either in education or popular culture or both. And it's just hard because how do you evangelize even your own family when they're just at school or watching television or hanging out with their friends and they're constantly exposed to sin and temptation in a way that drives them away from God. It's like you just seclude yourself from people who are not Catholic. I mean, it seems like at this point it's going to have to be the way we live, but I mean, we just kind of cut off our entire family and friends and all those people because it's also not, I don't think, in line with Christian teaching, especially if they're your own family.
Right. So yeah, you bring up a lot of great struggles. Like we're all called to evangelize, but how do I serve as an evangelist in the the circles that I move in when it seems like the rest of the world is evangelizing? People like to do the opposite, or in many cases, something very different. And so like it's so imbalanced. Like how am I ever going to have any influence or make any headway? And then also just to kind of preserve my own faith, and so that I'm not carried off by other and by temptation, and if I'm not trying to avoid putting myself in situations of temptation, one easy solution is to just kind of like try to seclude myself with other people in my group. But that, yeah, it usually doesn't work to be like super insular. Like I want to have people that support me, and that we're all kind of working on this together. But we're still called to evangelize the whole world, the rest of the world in which we live, and to interact with it. But yeah, there's always going to be this tension, and we find this even I think St. Paul talks about how our citizenship is in heaven; it's not on this earth. So like we have our passports for our whatever country that we're citizen of, but like more important than my citizenship to some nation state here on earth is my citizenship in heaven. So I live in the world, but hopefully I'm not of the world. So I'm necessarily living in this environment with all this, the good stuff and all the bad stuff that's in it, and trying to make it better and trying to live out my faith as best as I can while keeping my eye on my eternal goal.
So, difficult situation. Not going to gloss over that. But especially, I think, and different things can count for different people. If you can't exactly control your emotions and your attraction. So for a lot of people, it's actually really good to be aware that you experience this so that you can potentially guard against it, because it's not necessarily experiencing same-sex attraction, it's acting on it.
Oh my gosh, yes. Sorry, humongous distinction which I failed to make.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you can't, if you experience same-sex attraction, if like I, a woman, look at another woman and feel attracted to that woman, it's infinitely better for me to be aware that I'm attracted to that other woman so that I can prevent myself from putting myself in a situation where I might act on it, versus if I'm not aware of it, then I could accidentally put myself into a really emotionally charged situation that like I shouldn't be in, if that's just like a certain example. So I don't think it's like there's something inherently terrible about like somebody recognizing that they experience same-sex attraction. It's just about recognizing like how you fit in, how God's plan is relevant in your life. And that's a thing that can take a while to come towards. And loving somebody through that is a really beautiful and wonderful thing to say. Your dignity, it's like, it's really difficult to find a way to like describe it in a way that doesn't feel super condescending to another person. But it's kind of like, well, what's the right choice for you, especially in light of your human worth and dignity. And even if you're struggling with this, I'm going to love you through it. You know, if that makes sense. That's kind of the way that I look at it, because I have a lot of friends in like the LGBT community. So.
I guess what I'm thinking of is they have to be willing to listen.
And that's not your fault if they're not willing to listen.
It's difficult for them to want to listen when they have so many other people in their lives telling them, encouraging them in the wrong way.
Yeah, like I said, it's difficult.
So just a distinction that Rosie brought up that I wanted to highlight because I failed to make it earlier, and that's really huge, and it underlies sort of all of our the Catholic morals, is that there's a distinction between like me wanting to do something or me having an emotion and me committing a sin. So you know, anger can be a sin. It's like, well, wait, anger is an emotion. If I just get angry, that's not something that I choose. That's not something that I have control over. So that can't be a sin. Sin is only stuff that's deliberate. But if I have this emotion and then I like latch onto it, I engage my intellect and my will, and I start stewing over it, then it's a sin because I deliberately chose to do that, to just think about and stew over how angry I am at so and so. And so, you know, likewise with matters in our sexuality as well. So like, I could want to do whatever, but that doesn't mean that's different from what I actually do. And then in my super long list of things you're not supposed to do, I also failed to mention that we can sin not just by action, but also by thought as well. And so our Lord says this in the gospel. He says, you have heard that you should not commit adultery, but I say to you, even if a man looks with lust in his heart at a woman, he has already committed adultery with her. And so that I can see a person, be attracted to that person, and then start, you know, just whatever, the like, you know, the emotional or the sort of like the impulsive responses there. But then if I latch onto it and I start stewing over it, then I can lust over this person. I can sin against that person without that person knowing about it, and without having any behavior or interaction with that person, just sort of in my head. And so that's the way that can happen as well. Obviously, that's of lesser gravity than other behaviors. So yeah, just a distinction to point out. I think that's enough. We've gone, that's just like quite enough. So I will still be, I'm like, just because we're like drawing our class to a close doesn't mean that like you're not allowed to learn anymore, or that I'm no longer exist. Or, you know, many other priests who can explain things better than me, or other knowledgeable people. So please keep learning. Thanks for your attention through all of this stuff. And we're super excited for Easter and for beginning, not concluding, but beginning this great journey of being Catholics and becoming, you know, saints and all that good stuff. So to close, we'll pray the Hail Mary. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.